AV Clubbers. I'm Laura M. Browning, the co-editor of the AV Club. I am here today with Kory Stamper, who is a lexicographer for Merriam-Webster. She has just come out with the book Word by Word, The Secret Life of Dictionaries. It is about her life defining words for the dictionary. It's been described as a love letter to the English language. Kory, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
We are going to be talking about swear words today, so I'm going to give you a minute if you are at work or in the presence of small children. Perhaps you want to take a minute to put your headphones on, but we are going to be swearing a lot today. In your book, Kory, you have a whole chapter on the word bitch.
I do.
Why bitch?
Bitch is an interesting word because it has a whole bunch of different meanings that actually have not been recorded in dictionaries that are really old. And it's also a word that is, it varies a lot in its use, and it's just got a really rich history.
What are some of the uses of bitch that were not in the dictionary?
So one that I thought was really fascinating, as I was going through our entry, this all came about because I was looking at our entry for bitch in the online dictionary, and I noticed that when I was writing the book, it had no label saying it was offensive or vulgar or obscene. It was just presented as a normal, boring word like baseball or chair.
So was the definition like referring to female dogs?
There was a definition referring to female dogs. There was a definition referring to lewd or immoral women.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. There was a definition referring to malicious, domineering, or overbearing women.
And that's not offensive?
And that was not labeled as offensive. That did have a usage note that said it is sometimes used as a generalized term of abuse, but that's a really opaque usage note. It means nothing to most people. And then there was a definition that meant complaint. But none of those had labels on them. And there are these historical meanings and uses of bitch that go back for like hundreds and hundreds of years that aren't in the dictionary. So bitch was used back to the 1400s of men, and that wasn't in our dictionary. It wasn't in at all. And in fact, the use of bitch for men was pretty parallel to the use of bitch for women at the time, just something that was a difficult personality.
So it wasn't really a gendered slur the way it could be now.
It was certainly gendered because, of course, it came from this meaning female dog. But very quickly, it was applied to both lewd and immoral women, or I would say women that were considered lewd or immoral. We don't actually know. And at the same time to men who were difficult to work with, who were sort of cantankerous, pushy, that kind of meaning. So, and the use of the male bitch didn't show up in most dictionaries for a really long time.
Is that because men were writing the dictionary?
I think it could be, though interestingly enough, I went through our defining files. So we have, in the office, we have these giant card catalogs, and we have notes going all the way back to the mid-1800s for individual entries. So I looked at all of the defining cards for bitch. And oddly enough, from the late 1800s onward, there were a bunch of men leaving notes in the file saying, also, this term is used of men. It's ridiculous that we don't enter that. And those were always rejected by what would have been a male editor-in-chief. So what's interesting is there is this weird, how the perceived life of bitch and what's considered a valid use, that's able to be entered into the dictionary is definitely colored by someone's experience of the word bitch.
Right. There's a lot of ways that people say where my bitch is at.
Right. Yeah.
It's kind of a friendly, I guess, reclaimed word in some uses.
Yeah, and it's been, its reclamation has been, it really sort of came to the fore in second wave feminism. Joe Freeman wrote the Bitch Manifesto in, I think, 1967. And it's really become sort of this reclaimed slur, but what's really fascinating is that when we're doing the defining, we define everything based on these little snippets of the word in use. And sometimes those snippets are really unclear if this is a reclaimed positive use of bitch or a negative use of bitch.
Just a lack of context or?
Lack of context or sometimes you really have to be able to divine the intention of the writer, and you can't do that when you're just looking at like 100 words or a paragraph of a piece. So there are times when you're looking at a citation for bitch, and it'll talk about someone who's, a ball-busting bitch who gets what she wants, and it's like, okay, is that positive or negative?
Right.
It could be either.
Right. I was a little surprised to see that was the swear word you chose because it seems so innocuous these days.
Right.
But I know you've told me before, like, words like fuck are actually not, like, that interesting in terms of their definitions.
Right. Defining swear words is, people think it's really sexy, and it's really not. Like, when you are defining a swear word for the dictionary, your job is to make it as boring and narratively uninteresting as possible. And fuck has a lot of use. I mean, it's used as an adjective, as verb, and it's got sort of...
It does seem like the most kind of versatile swear.
Definitely. In that sense, it is, it's semantically broader in use than bitches, but it's also it's a pretty straightforward swear word.
Right. We do have a question, since we're talking about fuck. We have a question from Eric Munn. Is it true that fuck comes from fornication under consent of the king?
No. So pretty much any time, that's called an acronymic etymology.
Okay.
So where the word origin is said to be from an acronym. And pretty much all acronymic etymologies are bullshit. So if you hear anyone say, oh, tip is from to ensure promptness, or cop is from constable on patrol, or fuck has like a whole bunch of supposed acronymic etymologies. So there's fornication under consent of the king, for unlawful carnal knowledge, file under carnal knowledge, forbidden under consent of the king. Like, there's all sorts of these acronymic etymologies. And it's not from that. It's from, like, a Germanic verb that means to poke or to stab. Like, it's just pretty boring.
At least in the, like, 80s or 90s with Tipper Gore and Parents Music Resource Center. So
PRMC,
which was
PMRC.
In the mid-'80s, I think. I vaguely remember it.
Right.
But I remember all of, like, the explicit content labels, like, all the things like, rap albums having these, like, explicit lyrics and, like, your mom saying, oh, no, you can't buy that. But that seems to have, like, really opened up the way for, lowering the taboo for all of these swear words.
Yeah, so what's really fascinating about that is that group was founded as part of the moral majority, and it shows it had a group of songs called the Filthy 15.
Right. Topped by Prince.
Prince, yep. Darling Nikki was the top of the Filthy 15. Also included Twisted Sister's We're Not Gonna Take It.
Okay.
It was basically like, it's encouraging teenage rebellion, and in the video, they push the dad down the stairs. So I'm also sure Dee Snider dressing up in, makeup was probably not something they were down with. They focused mostly on music. There was a similar push in film and in television, but at that point, like, the FCC for television was pretty strict. I mean, I remember in probably the late 80s watching something like Hill Street Blues or Miami Vice, like, this is how old I am, and one of the characters saying ass and being like, oh my God. And it was like, it showed at like 10 p.m. local time. So like, we had to shove it way at the end of prime time. This group focused so much on inappropriate content in music. And there were hearings. I mean, it was amazing. Like, they had Dee Snider and Frank Zappa.
And John Denver.
Who I think they brought in for a congressional hearing thinking, sweet old John Denver will come in and say, we should have, wonderful, wholesome lyrics. This is a man who sang Rocky Mountain High. And he basically just decimated them and said, freedom in lyrics is important. So there was this huge, very, very public push. The thing that came out of that was the parental advisory stickers that you saw on rap albums and punk albums and on Prince albums, which was very weird. But the thing is that there was so much discussion about it that even though newspapers and magazines at the time did not print these words, it brought to light that these words are so common in the media that we consume that it was one of the things that sort of led to the FCC eventually lowering their standards for what you could not say on the air.
One last question. Why does using a swear word make me feel better? For example, I stub my toe and yell fuck. That's somehow like the equivalent of massaging the toe.
Right. So there was a study done, I think in 2014, and it was published in a neurology journal about do swears actually relieve pain? So they had a whole bunch of poor grad student volunteers submerge their arm in ice and keep it in ice for as long as they could. And they had two groups. They had their one group, they could say whatever they wanted. They could swear, they could do whatever they needed to do. And this other group could only use like one neutral word repeated over and over and over, like dog or something like that. And that, of course, they hooked them all up to electrodes and everything else. And they found that the group that was allowed to swear reported having greater pain relief than the group that was just given one neutral word to repeat over and over again.
I mean, I probably could have told them that.
Right. This is anecdata. We all know that. But the reason they don't quite know, but when you swear in times of pain, they think it involves the amygdala, which is a part of the brain that has the flight or fight response.
Right.
And so the amygdala lights up, and your heart rate goes up, and as a result of your heart rate going up, like the amygdala somehow suppresses the fight or flight. But it's the cursing that brings that out. It's not just saying ow, ow, ow.
Right.
It's saying motherfucker over and over again.
Well, there is something satisfying about like the swear words that we consider like the most taboo. I mean, I don't know that fuck is that taboo, but like they have these like really hard consonants and they're like fuck and cunt and
right. Yeah,
like
something
satisfying.
You like spit out. Yeah. And even words like ass, like there's like you can hang on to that S. Like, you ass. Like, it's just like, you can just lean into them.
Right.
And they all tend to be pretty short words.
Right. Although motherfucker is still pretty satisfying to...
Yeah, but there's this really great rhythm with motherfucker.
Right.
That's the other thing. Like, fucker by itself is just not as, you need that repetition, you need the 4 beats. Motherfucker. The warm-up and then the fuck. That's really what we like.
Well, that seems like a good note to end this motherfucking discussion. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Kory's book, Word by Word, is out now, and there is quite a lot of swearing in it. So if you enjoyed this conversation, you will find much to enjoy in the book. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.